Dawn brought not only light, but also the greed of the daughter-in-law, who returned certain she would find only silence and the jewels the old woman supposedly carried. But the forest, which she expected to be an accomplice to her crime, had become the stage for an ancient justice. The tiger, who had watched over the old woman all night, sensed the intruder's presence. Without a roar, but with the relentless determination of a protector, he rose and, like a golden shadow, hunted the villain. The forest, previously deserted, witnessed the fate of the daughter-in-law, who found herself confronted not with the fragility she expected, but with the untamed force of nature she had underestimated. Panic, a beast even wilder than the one pursuing her, tore at the daughter-in-law's throat. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed in protest, but terror was a relentless whip, driving her through the dense vegetation. Every branch that snapped under her feet, every leaf that brushed her face, seemed like an imminent claw, the warm breath of a death she herself had invoked. The forest, once a stage for her petty crime, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and menacing sounds, where every rustle confirmed her pursuit. She didn't look back, didn't dare. The image of the beast, who had watched over the old woman with deadly patience, was etched in her mind, a promise of retribution. The tiger, for his part, was in no hurry. He didn't need to be. He was the personification of predatory efficiency, a golden shadow moving with silent, almost supernatural fluidity. His eyes, which had reflected the moonlight while warming the old woman, now gleamed with the cold determination of a hunter. He didn't roar, didn't warn. He simply followed, each step a symphony of contained power, each movement calculated for the inevitable kill. The daughter-in-law was easy prey, clumsy and noisy, a discordant note in the forest's ancient harmony. She ran in circles of despair, aimless, hopeless, while the tiger, with the wisdom of 1,000 years of hunting, methodically cornered her. The end came as abruptly as the beginning of her flight. A stumble, a muffled cry, and the forest swallowed her last breath. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any words, a mute testament to nature's relentless justice. The daughter-in-law's greed, which had brought her back to steal what she believed were jewels, had met its final price. The forest, which she had underestimated, had claimed its debt. Far from there, under the golden light of the rising sun, the old woman watched. She hadn't seen the outcome, but she felt it. A deep, almost sacred calm descended upon her, replacing fear and anguish. The air, once heavy with menace, now felt light and pure. Her body, though still aching and tired from the night's rigors, felt strangely refreshed. The tiger's warmth, which had enveloped her like a protective cloak, still seemed to permeate her skin, a tangible memory of unexpected kindness. Like a shadow materializing from the sunlight itself, the tiger reappeared. There was no blood on his fangs, no uncontrolled ferocity in his gaze, only the same majestic dignity, the same watchful stillness. He approached the old woman, not with the haste of a predator, but with the calm of a guardian returning to his post. He lay down at a respectful distance, his eyes fixed on her. An imposing and comforting presence. The old woman, Donna Aurora, felt no fear. There was no terror in her eyes, only a deep reverence, a gratitude that transcended species barriers. She had been abandoned by her own family, left to die, and found and protected by a wild beast. True humanity, she realized, was not a prerogative of form, but a quality of spirit. And in that moment, the most human spirit she knew belonged to the great striped golden feline. Her thoughts wandered. The life she knew, social conventions, expectations of family and loyalty, all had dissolved in the cold forest night. What remained was the raw truth of survival, the interconnectedness of life, and the unexpected compassion that could arise in the most improbable places. The forest, which once seemed a tomb, now revealed itself as a sanctuary, and its guardian, a creature of pure instincts, had redefined for her the meaning of protection and justice. Donna Aurora moved with difficulty, feeling the stiffness in her limbs. The ropes had disappeared, torn by the tiger's teeth, but the mark of her oppression still lingered on her skin and in her soul. Yet, the physical pain was insignificant compared to the freedom she now breathed. She touched the damp ground with her fingertips, feeling the life beneath the earth. The sun climbed higher and higher, bathing the forest in a warm, promising glow. But freedom, she knew, was only the first step. She was alone, an 80-year-old woman, in the heart of a deserted forest. There were no roads, no houses, no signs of civilization. The tiger was her protector, yes, but not a guide to the world of men. The journey out of that wild paradise, now purified by justice, would be her next ordeal. What fate held for her, Donna Aurora did not know, but one thing was certain. She was no longer the same woman who had been tied up and abandoned. The forest and its guardian had transformed her. Freedom had a new taste, bittersweet but undeniably hers. The sun was already high, and the world, once a place of betrayal, now opened up as a vast and unknown path. The sun, now a golden sphere in the blue sky, painted the forest with shades of hope and a warmth that Donna Aurora felt in every fiber of her being. The stillness that followed the daughter-in-law's disappearance was not empty, but filled with the promise of a new beginning. The air, once dense with terror and betrayal, now smelled of wet earth, fresh leaves, and a freedom she never thought she would experience again. The majestic and silent presence of the tiger was a balm for her wounded soul. He was not just a protector, he was a living testament that compassion could blossom in the wildest hearts, and justice, at times, was delivered by the paws of nature. Donna Aurora moved cautiously, feeling her stiff muscles and aching joints protest with every small effort. Age and the night's ordeal had taken their physical toll, but her mind was clearer than ever. There was no longer room for paralyzing fear or the bitterness of betrayal. There was only deep gratitude and a newfound determination. She touched the ground, feeling the rough texture of the earth and roots, a palpable connection to the world that had saved her. Her eyes scanned the green immensity, searching for a path, a direction. But the forest, though now a sanctuary, was also an endless labyrinth. The tiger, as if reading her thoughts, raised his head. His amber eyes met hers, and Donna Aurora felt a communication that transcended words. It wasn't a command, nor an explicit invitation, but a mutual understanding. He rose with fluid grace, stretching his powerful body, and then, with a slow and deliberate movement, began to walk, not away from her, but in a direction that seemed more a suggestion than a lead. Donna Aurora knew she couldn't stay there. The forest had given her life back, but it wasn't her permanent place. She needed to find her way back to the world of men, a world that, ironically, had abandoned her. With a sigh that carried the weight of 80 years and the lightness of a new chance, she pushed herself up, using a fallen log for support. Each step was a small victory, a battle against physical weakness. Her legs trembled, but her will was unshakable. The tiger maintained a constant distance, always in sight, but never too close. He didn't rush her, seeming to understand her limitations. His movements were a silent ballet, a golden shadow moving among the trees, forging an invisible yet perceptible path. Donna Aurora followed, her eyes fixed on the striped form, an anchor in a green sea of uncertainties. Every 10 or 15 steps, she paused to rest, breathing deeply the pure air and feeling the sun warm her skin. Hunger and thirst began to manifest, cruel reminders of her vulnerability. She hadn't eaten or drunk since the previous night, and her elderly body craved sustenance. She looked around, searching for any sign of water or food, but the forest was dense and unknown. Fear, which she thought she had overcome, tried to creep back, a cold serpent in her stomach. But the image of the tiger, always there, always vigilant, pushed away the darkness. He was proof that she was not alone, that life, however hard, still held surprises and improbable allies. As she walked, her thoughts turned to the life she had left behind. The house, the memories, the few possessions she still had, and the jewels the daughter-in-law coveted, the jewels that never existed. The irony was bitter, but the lesson profound. True wealth was not in precious stones, but in dignity, resilience, and the unexpected kindness of a beast. She had been stripped of everything, but had gained something far more valuable, a new perspective on life and death, on humanity and savagery. The path was slow, tortuous. Branches scratched her clothes, the ground was uneven, and fatigue threatened to overcome her at every turn. But Donna Aurora did not give up. She felt the tiger's strength nearby, a silent energy that propelled her. He was her beacon, her guardian, her guide not to the world of men, but through the heart of the forest, a guide to survival itself. The sun began to dip to the west, and the golden light of morning gave way to a softer hue, foreshadowing the end of the day. The forest, which seemed infinite, began to transform again, shadows lengthening, sounds intensifying. Night was approaching, and with it new challenges, but Donna Aurora was no longer alone. She had the tiger, and a will to live that was as untamed as nature itself. The journey was just beginning. Shadows stretched like dark fingers, swallowing the fading sunlight. The air, once warm and vibrant, now carried the damp coolness of the approaching night. Donna Aurora felt the day's weight in every bone, exhaustion seeping into her marrow. Her legs, which had trembled before, now seemed ready to give way with each step. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her throat was dry, scratching with every breath. She looked at the tiger, his majestic silhouette against the last orange glow of the horizon. He stopped, his amber eyes fixed on a point ahead, then turned to her as if inviting her to quicken her pace. There was a silent urgency in his demeanor, an ancestral wisdom about the dangers that night brought. With monumental effort, Donna Aurora gathered her last strength. She knew she couldn't collapse there, at the mercy of the elements and the creatures that darkness would awaken. The tiger guided her to a smaller clearing, where a cluster of rocks formed a kind of natural shelter, a small recess at the base of an imposing rock formation. It wasn't a cave, but it offered protection from the wind and, perhaps, from unwanted gazes. The feline approached the shelter, sniffing the air cautiously before indicating with his head that it was safe. Donna Aurora dragged herself inside, feeling the cold of the stone against her back, but grateful for any kind of roof over her head. The tiger, for his part, did not enter. He lay down at the entrance, his massive body partially blocking the opening, a living wall of muscle and stripes. His eyes, even in the growing gloom, shone with unwavering vigilance. He was the sentinel, the guardian who did not sleep. The surrounding forest began to sing its nocturnal song, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant croaking of frogs, the buzzing of insects, and, occasionally, a faraway howl that made Donna Aurora's hairs stand on end, despite the tiger's presence. She hugged her knees, trying to conserve the little warmth left in her body. The image of the daughter-in-law, of her betrayal, still haunted the periphery of her mind, but it was quickly supplanted by the pressing need to survive. The thirst was almost unbearable. Her lips were cracked, her mouth dry. She tried to swallow, but her throat felt closed. The tiger, as if sensing her suffering, rose again. With the same silent grace, he moved away a little, and Donna Aurora followed him with her eyes, her heart tight with apprehension. He didn't go far, just a few meters, to a small crevice in the rocks from which a thin stream of water trickled, forming a shallow, dark puddle on the ground. Water, pure and crystalline. With a groan of relief, Donna Aurora crawled out of the shelter. She knelt with difficulty, her trembling hands reaching for the cold water. She drank in small, slow sips, feeling life return with each drop that went down her parched throat. Never before had water tasted so sweet, so vital. After quenching her thirst, she washed her face, feeling the freshness invigorate her tired skin. The tiger watched, motionless, before also leaning down to drink, his lips barely touching the surface. Back in the shelter, darkness was almost complete, punctuated only by the faint moonlight beginning to pierce the dense tree canopy. Donna Aurora felt temporary relief, but hunger persisted, a constant reminder of her fragility. She had no food, nor means to obtain it, but the tiger's presence, his warmth radiating even at a small distance, was a promise of safety. He was the personification of justice and protection, an unexpected link in her journey. She closed her eyes, trying to ward off tiredness and pain. The forest was a mystery, a challenge, but also a place of miracles. She had been abandoned to die, but life, through a wild predator, had given her a second chance. The night would be long and the path ahead uncertain, but Donna Aurora was no longer alone. She had the tiger, and a new strength, forged in the fire of adversity, that propelled her forward. The journey was just beginning, and each new dawn was a victory, a promise that life, after all, was worth living. The night in the forest was a symphony of whispers and distant roars, a wild concert unfolding around the small rock shelter. Donna Aurora, huddled on the cold ground, felt every sound amplified by the darkness and the silence of her own solitude. The rustle of leaves seemed like dragging footsteps, the snap of a branch, a warning. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, sought the imposing form of the tiger at the shelter's entrance. He was there, a dark, striped mass, his amber eyes reflecting the scant moonlight filtering through the trees. It was a comforting sight, the only barrier between her and the nocturnal mysteries of the jungle. Thirst had been quenched, but hunger was now a constant presence, a tight knot in her stomach. Her elderly body, already weakened by the ordeal, cried out for sustenance. She tried to ignore it, focusing on slow, deep breaths, but the emptiness was a cruel reminder of her vulnerability. Thoughts of food, of a warm bowl of soup, of a piece of bread invaded her mind, tormenting her. She knew there was nothing, and the idea of hunting or foraging for food in the forest was absurd for an 80-year-old woman, exhausted and injured. The cold of the stone penetrated her thin clothes, and she hugged herself tighter, trying to retain warmth. With each gust of wind, a shiver ran down her spine. Age made the cold even more insidious, a silent threat to her already fragile health. But even in the face of physical discomfort, a flame of determination burned in her chest. She had survived betrayal, the forest, the night. She would not give in now. Her thoughts inevitably turned to the daughter-in-law. The image of Clara's face, distorted by greed and cruelty, was an open wound. How could someone she had welcomed and loved harbor such malice? The irony of the situation, the search for jewels that never existed, was a bitter poison. Donna Aurora had lost everything, but she realized that what the daughter-in-law coveted was an illusion. True wealth, dignity, and resilience were intact within her. And now, she had life, a second chance, gifted by a predator. The tiger, in his silent vigil, seemed like an ancestral guardian. He didn't move, but his presence was an anchor, a point of safety amidst the chaos of the night. Donna Aurora felt the warmth radiating from his powerful body, a promise of protection. He wasn't just an animal. He was the personification of wild justice, a reminder that nature, in its unpredictability, could be both cruel and merciful. He was her miracle. Hours dragged on. Sleep was an unattainable luxury. Every time her eyes grew heavy, a new sound awakened her. or the image of the daughter-in-law resurfaced, or hunger gnawed. She watched the tiger, wondering what he thought, what he felt. There was an intelligence in his eyes, an understanding that transcended the species barrier. He had saved her, guided her, protected her. Why? Perhaps the forest had its own laws of balance, its own ways of correcting injustices. As the night advanced, the air began to grow colder, foreshadowing dawn. A thin mist began to form among the trees, giving the forest an ethereal and mysterious aura. Donna Aurora felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Day would bring light, but also the possibility of the daughter-in-law's return. The villain would not give up her intent so easily. Greed was a powerful force, and Clara, she knew, was relentless. The idea of facing Clara again, of seeing her, of feeling the weight of her betrayal was almost as terrifying as the forest itself. But Donna Aurora was no longer the same woman. The night's ordeal had transformed her. She had found an inner strength she never knew she possessed. Gratitude to the tiger and righteous anger against the daughter-in-law mingled, creating an iron determination. The first ray of sunlight, a faint golden thread, began to pierce the dense tree canopy. The forest gradually awakened. The sounds of night gave way to the songs of birds, the buzzing of bees. The mist began to dissipate, revealing the damp, vibrant beauty of dawn. Donna Aurora felt a breath of hope. She was alive. The tiger rose, stretching his body with surprising flexibility. He looked at Donna Aurora, and his amber eyes seemed to communicate a new urgency. It was no longer the passive vigil of the night, but a readiness, an anticipation. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, and a low, guttural growl escaped his throat, almost imperceptible. Donna Aurora felt a chill. It wasn't a growl of threat to her, but a warning, a perception of something approaching. The tiger turned his head, fixing his gaze in a specific direction, beyond the clearing. His muscles tensed, and he assumed a hunting posture, low and powerful. He seemed to have sensed a smell, a sound the old woman could not discern. The daughter-in-law. The villain was returning. The premonition chilled Donna Aurora's blood, but did not paralyze her. Justice was about to be served, and she would be the witness. The tiger, her improbable guardian, was ready to fulfill his destiny. The journey was far from over, but the final confrontation was imminent. Donna Aurora pushed herself up, her legs still weak, but her mind sharp. She watched the tiger, a magnificent and deadly beast, ready to protect what the forest had decided to save. Dawn brought not only light, but the promise of a reckoning. The morning air, once fresh and promising, now carried a weight, an almost palpable electricity. Donna Aurora felt the tiger's low growl vibrate in the ground beneath her feet, a primal sound that spoke of imminent danger and untamed force. Her eyes, previously fixed on the feline's imposing silhouette, followed the direction of his gaze. Penetrating the mist that still clung to the trees, there was nothing visible to her, only the green density of the forest stretching infinitely. But the tiger saw, or sensed, something her human senses could not grasp. He moved, not with the haste of an ill-considered attack, but with the calculated precision of an experienced predator. Every muscle in his body contracted and relaxed in a silent dance of power. He slinked out of the shelter, his stripes blending perfectly with the shadows and filtered light of dawn. Donna Aurora watched him disappear, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The guardian had become the hunter. Justice, she realized, would not be an abstract concept, but a wild and relentless manifestation. The forest, which had once been a refuge, now seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The birds had fallen silent, the buzzing of insects ceased. Only the sound of the wind, whispering among the leaves, filled the void, like an ancestral chorus announcing an inevitable event. Donna Aurora dragged herself to the entrance of the shelter, her eyes sweeping the clearing, looking for any sign. She felt a mix of terror and a strange, almost guilty satisfaction. The daughter-in-law was returning. The monster who abandoned her to die was about to reap what she had sown. Meanwhile, miles away, Clara, the daughter-in-law, advanced through the forest with arrogant confidence. The dawn light found her with a smug smile on her lips. She had slept poorly, the excitement of imminent wealth keeping her awake, but now, with the rising sun, the certainty of her success was invigorating. In her distorted mind, Donna Aurora was already history, a conveniently removed obstacle. The jewels she was convinced the old woman hid were within her grasp. Clara felt no remorse. Greed had corroded any trace of humanity in her heart. She imagined the old woman tied up, languishing in the cold night, and a shiver of perverse pleasure ran down her spine. The forest, to her, was merely a backdrop for her perfect crime, a place where the truth would be buried forever. She didn't perceive the signs, the unusual stillness, the silence that preceded the storm. Her mind was clouded by the vision of glittering precious stones, by the promise of a life of luxury. She approached the spot where she had left the old woman, her steps hurried, almost skipping. The sun now bathed the treetops in a vibrant gold, but on the forest floor shadows were still deep and deceptive. Clara hummed a cheerful tune, her eyes sweeping the ground, looking for the way back. She didn't bother to be silent. After all, who would be there to hear her? The forest was hers, the prey hers. Suddenly, a sound. Not a howl, not a growl, but the snap of a broken branch. Very close. Clara stopped, the smile frozen on her lips. Her eyes widened. A chill ran down her spine. She was not alone. The sound was not of a small animal, nor a bird. It was heavy, deliberate. She spun around, her eyes searching for the source of the noise, but the mist and shadows danced, deceiving her. Donna Aurora, from the shelter, saw the daughter-in-law emerge into the clearing. The old woman's heart leaped. There she was, the personification of her pain and betrayal, but instead of panic, a strange calm enveloped her. She watched Clara, who now seemed a pathetic figure, spinning in circles, fear beginning to distort her face. The hunter had become the hunted, the tiger. He was there, but he did not reveal himself. His presence was felt, not seen. He moved like a ghost among the trees, each step calculated, each breath controlled. He had scented the smell of evil, the odor of betrayal that mingled with the sweat of fear. His amber eyes, now focused, were the very essence of nature's vengeance. Clara felt a shiver run through her body. The air seemed denser, heavier. She tried to scream, but her throat was dry, paralyzed by terror. She knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. The forest, which she thought she had dominated, was now turning against her. Her eyes finally stopped at a point, a dark, striped mass materializing from the shadows, as if the forest itself had come alive. The tiger. It was no ordinary animal. It was a creature of legends, of nightmares. His eyes, gleaming with a cold, calculating intensity, fixed on her. The growl that escaped his throat was not a warning, but a condemnation. It was the sound of destiny, of reckoning. Clara tried to run, but her legs seemed rooted to the ground. Fear had immobilized her. She let out a strangled scream, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the silent forest. Donna Aurora watched, motionless. The tiger did not hesitate. With surprising speed for his size, he advanced. There was no uncontrolled fury in his attack, but lethal precision, the manifestation of wild justice. The forest, a silent witness, watched the unfolding of its own verdict. Donna Aurora's journey had reached a crucial point, and dawn brought not only light, but the relentless hand of retribution. Clara's scream tore through the forest silence like old fabric. A sharp, desperate sound that got lost among the trees, finding no echo of compassion. Her eyes, once filled with greed, now reflected a primal terror, the belated understanding that nature was not a stage for her crimes, but a relentless judge. She tried to retreat, but her feet seemed rooted to the damp ground, her mind screaming orders that her body, paralyzed by fear, refused to obey. The image of the tiger, materializing from the shadows with terrifying elegance, was the last thing her eyes would clearly register. Donna Aurora, from the shelter, watched the scene with a strange mix of horror and resignation. There was no triumph in her gaze, only the cold realization of a destiny being fulfilled. Clara's figure, once so imposing in her malice, now cowered, pathetic, before the brute and untamed force of the forest. The tiger was not an instrument of Donna Aurora's personal revenge. It was the forest itself exacting its price, restoring a balance that had been brutally broken. The tiger, a mass of muscle and stripes, wasted no time. Every movement was calculated, every step a declaration of power. There was no hesitation, only the certainty of a predator who had chosen its prey. He no longer growled, the condemnation had already been delivered. His amber eyes, fixed on Clara, gleamed with an intensity that seemed to devour the morning light. He lunged, not with the disordered brutality of a wild animal, but with the lethal precision of a fired arrow. The air seemed to vibrate with the force of his attack, and time, for an instant, seemed to stand still. Clara barely had time to let out a second scream, a muffled and final sound, before the golden and black mass struck her. The forest, which had whispered before, now seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the outcome. The impact was dry, brutal, a sound of breaking branches, of leaves being violently trampled, and then silence. A heavy, absolute silence that swallowed any trace of the confrontation. Only the wind, which had previously announced the storm, now seemed to mourn, or perhaps celebrate, in an almost inaudible murmur among the trees. Donna Aurora felt a shiver run down her spine, but it wasn't from fear. It was the feeling of a nightmare ending, the resolution of an injustice. She didn't see the details, and perhaps it was better that way. The image that would remain was that of wild, relentless justice, which had manifested in her defense. Her eyes swept the clearing, looking for Clara, but the daughter-in-law had disappeared, swallowed by the shadows and the fury of nature. The tiger, the magnificent guardian, stood there, imposing, as if nothing had happened. His eyes turned to Donna Aurora, and in them the old woman swore she saw a calm, a primal satisfaction. The sun, now higher, began to completely dissipate the mist, bathing the forest in a vibrant gold. The light revealed the clearing, now empty, except for the majestic presence of the tiger and the old woman in the shelter. The threat had been neutralized. Clara's greed, which had brought her back to steal the jewels she believed Donna Aurora hid, had been her ruin. The forest did not allow her intent to materialize. The jewels, if they even existed, would remain untouched, or perhaps their value became irrelevant in the face of the magnitude of what had just happened. Donna Aurora took a deep breath. The morning air, once heavy with tension, now felt light and pure. She was alive, and not just alive, but free. Free from fear, free from betrayal, free from Clara's shadow. The ordeal of the night and dawn had stripped her of everything, but it had also filled her with a strength she never imagined possessing. The tiger, her improbable savior, remained for a moment, watching her. There was a silent connection between them, an understanding that transcended species barriers. He had fulfilled his part in the forest's invisible pact. Slowly, her legs still trembling, Donna Aurora stood up. Her body ached, but her mind was clear. She looked at the tiger, and an almost imperceptible nod escaped her. A deep gratitude which words could not express filled her heart. The tiger, as if he had understood, turned and, with the same silent elegance with which he had appeared, disappeared among the trees. His stripes blending perfectly with the light and shadow of the forest. Donna Aurora was alone again, but it wasn't the same solitude as the night before. There was no despair, only a thoughtful quietness. The sun warmed her skin, and the sounds of the forest, once menacing, now seemed like a welcoming chorus. The journey was not yet over, but the greatest obstacle had been removed. She needed to find a way back, but now, with the daylight and the feeling of a new chance, the task seemed less daunting. The forest, which had been her hell, now revealed itself as her sanctuary, and the tiger, her wild guardian angel. Life, somehow, had given her a second chance, and she was determined to live it fully. The smell of wet earth and damp leaves filled the air, and Donna Aurora felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Nature, in its ancestral wisdom, had delivered justice. The peace Donna Aurora felt was a balm for her soul, but her body, battered by the cold night and tension, cried out for attention. The smell of wet earth and damp leaves, once a sign of hope, now mingled with the subtle metallic odor that hung in the air. A vivid reminder of what had just happened. She was alive, yes, but the reality of her situation imposed itself with the force of a blow. Alone, in the heart of a vast and unknown forest, without food, without water, and with age weighing on every joint. With a muffled groan, Donna Aurora tried to move. Her legs, numb and stiff, protested. Every muscle seemed to have been subjected to slow, prolonged torture. The adrenaline that had kept her alert during the confrontation with Clara and the tiger's appearance began to dissipate, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She needed to get up, needed to leave, but the simple act of lifting her torso seemed a Herculean task. Slowly, leaning on exposed roots and the trunk of a nearby tree, she managed to sit up. Her head spun for an instant, and she closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to calm the dizziness. The sun, now higher, filtered through the treetops, painting the forest floor with golden patches and dancing shadows. It was a spectacle of beauty, but Donna Aurora couldn't fully appreciate it. Her eyes swept the clearing, searching for any trace of Clara, but there was nothing. The forest had erased her tracks with frightening efficiency. Nature left no witnesses, only the memory of what had been. The tiger's absence was equally notable. He had emerged as a force of nature and disappeared in the same way, leaving behind only the sense of his majestic presence and the immense gratitude Donna Aurora felt. He was not a pet, nor a domesticated savior. He was the very essence of savagery, of primal justice, and now she was on her own. The first necessity was water. Her throat was dry, scratching, and thirst was a growing agony. She knew that without water, her chances of survival drastically decreased. With renewed effort, she managed to stand, swaying. Each step was a struggle, a battle against pain and weakness. She moved like a puppet whose strings were about to break, but the determination in her eyes was unshakable. Where to go? The forest stretched in all directions, a green and impenetrable labyrinth. She tried to orient herself by the sun, which now pointed east, but had no idea where she had come from or where she should go. The only thing she remembered was being dragged inland, far from any road or civilization. She needed to find a stream, a watercourse. Water always led somewhere. With this new goal in mind, Donna Aurora began to move, dragging her feet through the damp foliage. The smell of earth and moss was strong, and the sounds of the forest, once oppressive, now seemed less menacing. The singing of birds, the buzzing of insects, the rustling of leaves in the wind, all this composed a wild symphony that somehow calmed her. She was not alone, after all. Life pulsed around her, indifferent to her small human tragedy. She thought of the jewels, the cause of all her misfortune. If Clara was looking for them, they must have had some value. But now, the sparkle of precious stones seemed insignificant compared to the invaluable worth of life itself. What were diamonds and emeralds compared to a sip of fresh water or the warmth of an embrace? Clara's greed had led her to ruin, and Donna Aurora, by a miracle, had been spared. With each step, the pain increased, but the old woman did not allow herself to stop. She remembered the tiger's strength, his determination to protect her. If a wild animal could demonstrate such resilience, she, a woman who had faced so many adversities in life, could not give up. She visualized her late husband's face, the image of her grandchildren, the promise of a simple, peaceful life in her shelter. These images were her anchor, her motivation. Suddenly, a sound, not the snap of a branch, but the soft murmur of running water. Donna Aurora stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. Was it a mirage, a trick of the forest? She strained her ears, and the sound grew clearer, more distinct. A stream. A wave of hope flooded her, giving her renewed strength. She quickened her pace, ignoring the searing pain in her legs, following the sound like a beacon in the darkness. The forest was still a challenge, but the promise of water was the first victory in her long journey home. Life, after all, still had much to offer. The murmur, once a distant whisper, transformed into an audible promise, an irresistible call. Donna Aurora, propelled by a force that transcended her exhaustion, dragged herself towards the sound. Each step was an act of faith, each leaf that bent under her feet, an echo of her hope. The vegetation thickened, branches scratched her skin, but she felt no pain. Her eyes, fixed on the sonic horizon, sought the gleam of water. The smell of wet earth intensified, and then, through a curtain of ferns and tangled bushes, she saw it. A small stream, its crystal-clear waters winding over polished stones, glistening under the sun's rays that stubbornly pierced the dense tree canopy. It was a thread of life, a liquid miracle, manifesting before her blurred eyes. Donna Aurora fell to her knees on the bank, not caring about the cold mud that stained her hands and knees. With trembling hands, she plunged them into the icy water, feeling a refreshing shock that ran through her arms to her chest. She brought them to her mouth, drinking in large gulps, feeling life return with each drop. The thirst, a searing torture that had accompanied her since the night, began to subside, replaced by an almost euphoric sense of relief. She drank until her throat stopped scratching, until her stomach felt heavy but not satiated. The water was cold, pure, and washed away not only her thirst, but also some of the night's terror, betrayal, and loneliness. Sitting by the stream, Donna Aurora allowed herself a moment of rest, a deep breath that seemed to last an eternity. Her body still ached, every muscle protesting against the abuse, but her mind was clearer, more focused. She watched the small stones in the streambed, the leaves floating gently on the current. The sun, now higher, warmed her back, and the constant murmur of the water was a lullaby, a balm for her exhausted soul. She felt like a castaway who had just found solid ground after a relentless storm. The image of Clara, of the tiger, seemed like a distant nightmare, although the subtle smell of disturbed earth and something denser, almost metallic, still hung in the air, a vivid reminder of the brutal outcome. She touched her forehead, feeling her wrinkled, sweaty skin, the jewels. They had been the spark, the catalyst for all that madness, the reason for the greed that almost cost her life. Now, the sparkle of precious stones seemed so trivial, so insignificant. Life, the simple ability to breathe, to feel the sun warm her skin, to drink fresh water, was the true jewel, the invaluable treasure she had rediscovered. But peace was ephemeral. She couldn't stay there forever, at the mercy of the forest. The stream was a guide, a natural compass. Water always flowed downhill, always found a way, however winding. If she followed the current, perhaps she would reach a larger river, or who knows, a road, a farm, some trace of civilization. It was a faint hope, a thread of light in the vast darkness of uncertainty, but it was all she had. With a sigh that carried the weight of her age and her ordeal, she rose again, feeling the stiffness in her joints. Her shoes were muddy, her clothes torn and dirty, but she was alive. And with that life came the responsibility to fight for it, to find her way back. As she walked slowly along the stream's bank, her eyes, trained by life in the countryside, noticed something. Fresh tracks in the damp mud, larger than a dog's but smaller than the tiger's. Perhaps a deer or a smaller animal that had come to drink. But there was also a more subtle, almost imperceptible trail in the denser vegetation. A scent which she couldn't fully identify, but which evoked a sense of primal alert. The forest was alive, vibrant, and she was merely an intruder in its domain. The tiger. He had disappeared, but his presence still seemed to linger, an invisible guardian, or perhaps a constant reminder of the savagery that surrounded her, a force that both saved and frightened her. She didn't see the tiger, but she felt that the forest still carried him in its echo, in its silence. The walk was slow and exhausting. Exposed roots were treacherous traps, stones were slippery, and dense vegetation forced her to constantly detour, to clear a path with her aged hands. The sun climbed in the sky, and the heat began to make itself felt, despite the protective shade of the trees. Her body cried out for rest, for food. Hunger began to gnaw at her stomach, a new agony adding to the muscle pain and exhaustion. She tried to remember something about edible plants, about wild fruits, but her mind was clouded, focused only on one goal: to follow the stream. Each step was an act of pure will, a battle against weakness and despair. She clung to branches, slipped in the mud, but never fell. The image of her grandchildren, the promise of a warm hug, of a safe home, were the fuel that propelled her. "I won't give up," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "I survived, Clara. I survived the night. I will survive this, too." The forest seemed to test her at every bend of the stream, at every natural obstacle that stood in her way. But Donna Aurora felt a strength growing within her, a resilience she had forgotten she possessed. The fragile old woman who had been tied up and abandoned had died in the night. In her place, there was a woman forged in adversity, hardened by betrayal, but also blessed by a wild miracle. She didn't know what the future held for her, but she knew she wouldn't be the same. The forest had stripped her of her naivety, but had gifted her with a new perspective on life and death, on justice and savagery. And she, Donna Aurora, was ready to embrace whatever came. The stream wound its way, and she followed it, a small, determined figure against the green vastness, each step a silent prayer, each breath an affirmation of life. The journey home had only just begun, but now she was no longer alone. The forest, somehow, was with her. With each step, the stream seemed to whisper ancient secrets, its waters mirroring a sky that became an increasingly whitish veil of light, filtered by the dense tree canopy. Donna Aurora, her muscles crying for mercy, followed the watercourse, a silver line of hope amidst the relentless green. Thirst had been quenched, but hunger now gnawed at her stomach, a new torture adding to her exhaustion. Her feet, previously aching, now felt numb, moving at a slow, methodical pace, propelled only by sheer willpower. The sun, which had previously warmed her, now became a silent enemy, its heat penetrating the foliage and making the air heavy and damp. The smell of wet earth and moss gave way to a denser aroma of decaying leaves and tree sap, a wild perfume that seemed to fill her lungs. The sounds of the forest, once a comforting symphony, began to transform into a cacophony of whispers and snaps. The singing of birds, the buzzing of insects, the rustling of leaves, all this merged into a constant noise that at times seemed to hide something more, something lurking. She tried to keep her mind occupied, Warding off thoughts of despair, she remembered her husband's face, her grandchildren's laughter, the peaceful mornings in her garden. These memories were anchors, holding her to reality, preventing her from getting lost in the green vastness. But no matter how hard she tried, the image of the tiger returned. His golden eyes, the strength of his fangs tearing the ropes, the warmth of his body. He was a creature of wild beauty and unquestionable brutality, a paradox that had saved her and, at the same time, had plunged her even deeper into the heart of untamed nature. Was he still nearby? The forest seemed to breathe with an invisible presence. There was no longer the metallic smell that indicated Clara's end, but there was a subtle, almost imperceptible trail of something large and powerful that had passed by. It was the smell of the forest itself, but also the smell of a predator, a constant reminder that she was an intruder, vulnerable, despite her improbable alliance. She felt that the forest was watching her, testing her resilience, deciding if she was worthy to continue. The stream, her faithful guide, began to narrow, its banks becoming steeper and the vegetation even denser. Thorny branches scratched her legs, and exposed roots became treacherous traps. She slipped a few times, falling to her knees in the cold mud, but always got up, the determination in her eyes unshakable. "I won't give up," she repeated to herself, her voice hoarse, almost a whisper against the silent roar of the forest. "I survived the betrayal. I survived the night. I will survive this too." With each bend of the stream, the hope of finding a sign of civilization diminished, replaced by a growing sense of isolation. The forest seemed to close in on her, the trees growing taller, their canopies forming an almost impenetrable roof that transformed day into an eternal twilight. Sunlight barely reached the ground, and the air grew colder, damper. A chill ran down her spine, not just from the cold, but from a sense of foreboding. Suddenly, a sound. Not the murmur of the stream, nor the song of a bird, but a dry, loud snap, like a branch breaking under considerable weight. Donna Aurora stopped abruptly, her heart pounding erratically in her chest. She held her breath, straining her ears, trying to discern the origin of the sound. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. The forest seemed to have stopped breathing, all its inhabitants hushed, waiting. She looked around, her aged eyes trying to pierce the dancing shadows. There was nothing, only trees, ferns, and the winding stream. But the feeling of being watched was palpable, a shiver that ran up her neck. Was it the tiger or something else? The forest was home to many creatures, and not all were benevolent. With adrenaline coursing through her veins, Donna Aurora resumed walking, her steps now more hurried, almost a clumsy trot. She needed to get out of there, find a more open place where she could see her surroundings. The stream, which had once been her comfort, now seemed to lead her into an even deeper and more menacing labyrinth. Then, through the dense foliage, she glimpsed something that did not belong in the forest. It was not a rock, nor a fallen log. It was a color that stood out from the green and brown, a faded shade of blue. With a mix of hope and terror, she veered from the stream, clearing a path with trembling hands, until she reached the object. It was a piece of fabric, torn and dirty, caught on a thorny bush. A piece of cloth that, despite being faded, she recognized. It was part of Clara's shirt. The air seemed to thin in her lungs. Clara, the villain, the tiger, had hunted her. The premise was clear. But why would a piece of her clothing be there, so far from the confrontation site and so intact? An icy chill ran through Donna Aurora, not just from fear, but from a terrible understanding. The forest was not done with her. And perhaps, just perhaps, the tiger wasn't either. What did that piece of cloth mean? Was it a trace of the hunt, carried by the wind, or a more sinister sign, a clue that danger still lurked in a way she could never predict? The journey home, she realized, was far from over. The forest still held its secrets, and she, Donna Aurora, was about to discover another one. That faded blue piece of fabric, caught on a thorny bush, seemed like a spectre. It wasn't just a piece of cloth. It was irrefutable proof that the nightmare was not over. It was part of Clara's shirt. The air, already thin, seemed to vanish entirely from Donna Aurora's lungs. Her eyes, previously focused on survival, now widened with an icy terror that paralyzed her. Clara, the woman who had tied her up and left her to die. The woman whom the tiger in its wild fury had attacked. The premise of her death was the only thing that maintained Donna Aurora's sanity, the only guarantee that the most immediate danger had been neutralized. But there it was, a macabre vestige, swaying gently in the wind, mocking her newfound peace. A wave of nausea hit her. How was it possible? The tiger's roar, the sight of the beast over the daughter-in-law, the quietness that followed. Everything indicated a brutal end. Had Clara survived? Or what was perhaps even more terrifying, had she escaped and returned? Donna Aurora's mind spun in a whirlwind of unanswered questions, each more frightening than the last. The forest's silence, once oppressive, now became a cloak of expectation. Every falling leaf, every branch that snapped under the weight of an invisible animal seemed like a warning. The feeling of being watched, which had accompanied her since dawn, intensified, transforming into an icy certainty. It was no longer the forest testing her. It was something closer, more personal, more malicious. She knelt, her trembling hands reaching for the piece of fabric. The rough texture, the faint smell of sweat and earth, left no doubt. It was hers, and if it was there, so far from the confrontation site she imagined, it meant Clara had moved, that she was alive, and that, probably, she was nearby. The reason for Clara's return, however, was as clear as the stream water. The jewels, the daughter-in-law's greed, was a force as powerful as wild nature itself. Not even an encounter with a furious tiger would be able to extinguish the flame of covetousness in her heart. She had returned, and that meant the danger not only lurked, but had materialized again, more cunning, more desperate. Donna Aurora stood up, the pain in her joints forgotten in the face of the new threat. Her eyes, once tired, now gleamed with a mixture of fear and renewed determination. The fragile old woman was dead, yes, but the woman forged in adversity now had a tangible enemy, and she would not allow Clara to defeat her, not after all she had been through. She looked around, trying to find other signs, a trail, anything that indicated the direction Clara had taken, but the forest was a master at hiding secrets. The dense vegetation, the ground covered with leaves and moss, revealed nothing but its own relentless beauty. However, the air seemed to vibrate with a different energy, a tension that was not just from nature, but from a human presence, distorted by malice. The tiger. Where was he? The premise of her salvation and the hunt for the villain echoed in her mind. He had saved her, warmed her. He was the improbable guardian, the instrument of wild justice. If Clara had returned, would the tiger also be aware? The forest seemed to breathe with that question, a heavy silence that stretched among the trees. Donna Aurora felt she was not alone. Not only was Clara nearby, but the tiger's presence, though invisible, seemed stronger now, as if the beast was lurking, sensing the scent of the escaped prey. It was a game of cat and mouse, and she, Donna Aurora, was in the middle, an involuntary piece on a deadly board. She resumed walking, but now her steps were more cautious, her ears more attentive. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a threat. Hunger and exhaustion still tormented her, but the fear of Clara was a powerful stimulant, keeping her on high alert. The stream continued to wind its way, but now it seemed a path to danger, not to salvation. At every turn, Donna Aurora expected to see Clara's figure lurking among the trees, her eyes filled with hatred and greed. The image was so vivid that she had to force herself to blink, to remember it was just her imagination, fueled by terror. Suddenly, a sound. Not the snap of a branch, but a muffled murmur, almost a groan, coming from somewhere ahead, through the dense foliage. It was not the sound of an animal. It was human, and it was a sound of pain. Donna Aurora froze. Her heart beat so hard it felt like it would leap from her chest. It was Clara, she was certain, but why would Clara be groaning? Had the tiger wounded her more severely than she imagined, or was it a trap, a way to lure her in? Curiosity, mixed with paralyzing fear, propelled her. She moved slowly, every muscle tense, every breath shallow. She pushed her way through the bushes, her eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. The forest seemed to trap her, its branches and leaves closing around her, as if leading her to the center of a macabre stage. Then she saw her. Not Clara standing, victorious and menacing, but a fallen figure, partially hidden by a tangle of ferns and roots. It was Clara, yes, but not the Clara she expected. The daughter-in-law was wounded, her blue shirt torn even further, revealing a deep gash in her leg, which bled profusely. Her eyes were wide with pain and terror, fixed on something Donna Aurora could not see. Clara was alive, but she was on the verge of death, and the sight of her, so vulnerable and wounded, brought no relief to Donna Aurora, but rather a new wave of dread. For if Clara was like this, wounded and terrified, it meant the tiger had not finished his work, and that he was nearby, very nearby. The metallic smell of blood, which she had associated with Clara's end, now hung heavy in the air, stronger than ever. The hunt had resumed, and Donna Aurora was about to witness the final outcome. The metallic smell of blood, once a distant memory of the confrontation, now hung heavy in the air, stronger than ever, suffocating Donna Aurora. It was not the smell of death consummated, but of present agony, a chilling omen. Her eyes, which had witnessed so much pain and despair, now fixed on the fallen figure of Clara, the daughter-in-law who had abandoned her. The faded blue shirt, now torn and stained dark red, revealed the deep wound in her leg, a cruel work of wild nature. Clara was alive, yes, but on the edge of the abyss, her eyes wide with terror, not for Donna Aurora, but for something beyond, something the old woman could not yet see. A chill ran down Donna Aurora's spine. It was not the cold of the forest, but the recognition of an imminent, palpable danger. Clara's mind, even in her state of agony, seemed to project a fear so intense that it infected the surroundings. What did the daughter-in-law see? What had paralyzed her so completely beyond the excruciating pain? The answer came before Donna Aurora could fully formulate it. A movement. Not a sound, but a distortion in the foliage's density. A blur that materialized from the shadows with terrifying fluidity. It was the tiger. He emerged like a golden phantom, his steps as silent as a falling leaf. His eyes, once a beacon of warmth and protection for Donna Aurora, now burned with a wild intensity fixed on the wounded prey. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The beast had not finished its work. Donna Aurora felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, not from a physical tremor, but from the magnitude of the animal's presence. The air grew dense, charged with a primal energy. She couldn't tear her gaze away, caught in a macabre trance. The tiger who had warmed and protected her was now the very incarnation of wild justice, a predator driven by an ancestral instinct, but also, perhaps, by a greater purpose. Clara let out a muffled groan, a mix of pain and dread that barely escaped her throat. She tried to drag herself, move her wounded leg, but the effort was futile. Blood streamed, forming a dark puddle on the forest floor, an olfactory beacon for the beast. The tiger approached, not in haste, but with calculated determination, every muscle tense, every hair bristling. He was not just a hunter, he was a judge, an executioner. Donna Aurora watched, her heart beating erratically in her chest. There was no room for pity. The image of Clara tying her up, the cold look of abandonment, the greed for the jewels, all of it projected in her mind. The daughter-in-law had chosen her destiny the moment she left her to die. And now the forest, in its brutal wisdom, was collecting the debt. The tiger stopped a few feet from Clara, his amber eyes fixed on hers. It was a silent confrontation, yet deafening in its intensity. The forest seemed to hold its breath, leaves motionless, birds hushed. Then, with a roar that made the trees vibrate and Donna Aurora's heart leap, the tiger charged. There was no struggle, no screams, only a muffled sound, a last gasp of air that escaped Clara's throat, and then silence, a different silence, a silence of finality. Donna Aurora closed her eyes for an instant, her body trembling. When she opened them again, the scene before her was confirmation that the nightmare had come to an end. The tiger, majestic and terrible, was there, his mission accomplished. He did not look at Donna Aurora, did not seek recognition. He simply turned, with the same fluidity with which he had appeared, and disappeared into the depths of the forest, leaving behind only the smell of blood and the stillness of death. The old woman felt a weight lifted from her shoulders, a burden she didn't even know she carried. Clara's threat, the shadow of greed and betrayal, had been extinguished. Justice, though wild and relentless, had been served. But there was no triumph in her heart, only a strange emptiness, a profound exhaustion that now hit her with full force. She knelt, not out of weakness, but from an instinct of reverence. The forest, which had once been a labyrinth of dangers, now seemed to have calmed, as if the storm had passed. The nearby stream, winding its way, murmured a soft song, a lament and a solace. Donna Aurora was alone again, but in a different way. No longer helpless, but forged, tested, and somehow purified. Hunger and thirst returned to torment her, more intense now that the adrenaline had subsided. Her body ached, every muscle protested, but her mind was clear. She needed to get out of there, find her way back to civilization. The forest had given her a second chance, and she would not waste it. With immense effort, Donna Aurora stood up. Her eyes swept the scene one last time. Clara's body, now motionless, and the spot where the tiger had disappeared. Nature had reclaimed what was hers. The forest, with its secrets and its brutality, had been the stage of her ordeal and her salvation. The path ahead was still uncertain, but now Donna Aurora walked with a new determination, a strength that only proximity to death and wildlife could grant. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, a new dawn for the old woman who had survived the impossible. The sun, once a herald of hope, now bid farewell, tinging the horizon with the colors of parting. Orange and purple mingled in a melancholic spectacle, a new dawn for Donna Aurora. Yes, but a dawn that brought with it the promise of an even longer and colder night. The scene of Clara's death, brutal and final, was still etched in her retinas, a silent echo resonating in the forest's quietness. The smell of blood, though fainter now, seemed to permeate the air, a poignant reminder of the wild justice that had been served. Donna Aurora felt the weight of that moment. There was no joy, no triumph in her heart, only a strange emptiness, an exhaustion that hit her with overwhelming force. The adrenaline that had kept her on her feet, that had propelled her through terror and uncertainty, now dissipated, leaving her at the mercy of an exhausted body and an overwhelmed mind. Every muscle protested, every joint ached. Hunger and thirst, once secondary to fear, now cried out with an almost unbearable urgency. She stood up, swaying, her knees weak, but determination, a stubborn flame, still burned in her chest. The forest, which had been the stage of her ordeal and her salvation, now presented itself in a new light. No longer a labyrinth of imminent dangers caused by Clara, but a challenge in itself. A vast and indifferent place, where survival depended on her own strength and cunning. The tiger, her improbable guardian, had fulfilled his part and disappeared, leaving her alone again, but with a new perspective. Her eyes swept the scene one last time. Clara's motionless body was a somber reminder of the price of greed and malice. Nature had reclaimed what was hers, and Donna Aurora, a reluctant witness, had survived to tell the tale, but before telling it she needed to leave. The walk resumed, but now it was a different journey. No longer a desperate escape, but a quest for redemption, for a return to the life that had been stolen from her. Each step was a battle against exhaustion. Dry branches snapped under her feet. The rustling of leaves seemed a constant whisper of warning. Darkness began to swallow the edges of the forest, and with it came the nocturnal sounds. The distant croaking of a frog, the melancholic hoot of an owl, the rustling of invisible creatures. Fear, though different from the terror Clara inspired, still accompanied her. It was the fear of the unknown, of the overwhelming solitude of the forest night. But there was also a strange sense of peace. The most direct threat had been eliminated. The tiger, though absent, seemed to have left a mark on her soul, a fierce resilience that propelled her. She remembered the warmth of his body, the silent strength he radiated. It was as if part of that strength had been transferred to her. She clung to the image of the stream, the only constant on her path. The water, which once seemed a path to danger, now was her only hope for guidance. If she followed the stream, it would lead her out to somewhere she could find help. But the stream wound its way, and with each bend, the forest seemed to close in even further, the tree trunks transforming into menacing silhouettes against the darkening sky. Hunger was a constant ache in her stomach, and thirst scratched her throat. She paused for a moment, bending down to drink the cold stream water, which seemed to wash away not only the dirt, but also some of the trauma. The water was pure, refreshing, a small miracle amidst her ordeal. But it wasn't enough. She needed food, shelter. Night fell completely, and with it the cold intensified. Donna Aurora hugged herself, trying to retain the little warmth left in her body. Shadows danced around her, transforming every bush into a ghostly figure. She felt small, insignificant, before the wild immensity. But she would not give up. Not now, not after all she had been through. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom, tried to discern any sign of civilization. A distant light, the sound of an engine, anything that indicated human presence. But there was only the silence of the forest, which seemed to deepen with the darkness. She remembered the jewels, the cause of so much cruelty. They were still with her, hidden in her pocket, a cold, inert weight. A bitter reminder of what had unleashed that entire nightmare. Suddenly a faint glow, not an artificial light, but a point of light that seemed to pulse in the midst of the darkness. Was it a campfire, or just the moon's reflection on some wet surface? Hope, fragile and uncertain, ignited in her chest. It could be a camp, a sign that she was approaching the end of her journey. Or it could be a mirage, a trap of exhaustion. With renewed but faint energy, Donna Aurora changed her direction, moving away from the stream and heading towards the glow. Each step was an act of faith. The forest seemed to conspire against her, branches tangling in her clothes, roots tripping her feet. The glow seemed to recede and approach, a deceptive beacon amidst the darkness. She needed to reach it, needed to know. Whatever awaited her would be the next chapter of her story, a story she was determined to live to the end. The glow, at first, was a wavering point of light, an almost cruel mirage in the oppressive darkness of the forest. Donna Aurora, with exhaustion corroding her last reserves of energy, clung to it like a castaway to a last plank. Each step was a battle, an act of faith against the searing pain in her legs and the cold that bit at her skin. Hope, fragile and stubborn, propelled her, a flickering flame amidst the void. She moved away from the stream, whose gentle murmur now seemed a distant lament, and plunged deeper into the dense undergrowth. Dry branches like skeletal fingers scratched her exposed skin, tearing her already ragged clothes. Treacherous roots, hidden beneath the layer of damp leaves, tangled around her feet, threatening to trip her with every faltering movement. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the dancing light that guided her, an uncertain beacon that sometimes showed itself, sometimes hid, as if the forest itself wanted to test her sanity. Her eyes, already accustomed to the gloom, tried to discern the shapes before her, transforming every bush into a ghostly figure, every shadow into a potential threat. The night's silence, dense and heavy, was occasionally broken by a distant snap, the rustle of invisible creatures or the melancholic hoot of an owl, making her heart pound in her chest. Hunger was a constant ache, an empty hole in her stomach that seemed to drain her last energies. Thirst scratched her throat, and the cold stream water, though a temporary relief, was no longer enough to quench the dryness that consumed her. She needed more. She needed warmth, shelter, safety. The image of the tiger, with his comforting warmth and silent strength, lingered in her mind, a bittersweet memory of a wild protection that seemed to have been just a dream, a surreal interlude in her nightmare. As she drew closer, the glow became more constant, more defined. It was not a mirage, it was real. A faint warmth began to caress her face, and the smell of smoke, mingled with the damp aroma of earth and decaying leaves, filled her nostrils. A campfire. There was a campfire. And where there's a campfire, there are people. A wave of relief, as powerful as the fear that had accompanied her for hours, swept through her body. Her legs, previously heavy and aching, seemed to gain new vigor, propelled by the urgency of hope. She quickened her pace, the flame of expectation now burning more intensely in her heart. But along with the relief came a pang of apprehension. Who would be there in the middle of the forest at that hour of the night? Were they hunters, loggers, or something more sinister? The memory of Clara, of betrayal and greed, was still fresh, a cruel reminder that not all humans were trustworthy. She stopped at a safe distance, hidden by the trees, and peered out. The campfire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows in a small clearing. Around it were two figures, two men. They sat on tree stumps, talking in low voices, their faces illuminated by the orange glow of the flames. They seemed to be simple men, perhaps hunters or woodsmen, judging by their rustic clothes and the equipment laid out on the ground. One had a straw hat and a grizzled beard. The other, younger, seemed to watch the forest with an attentive gaze, his shotgun resting beside him. Donna Aurora hesitated. Her mind, exhausted and overwhelmed, wrestled between the desperate need for help and the caution life had taught her. What to do? Reveal herself? Or wait, observe, try to understand the situation before exposing herself? The cold, however, was becoming unbearable, and exhaustion threatened to fell her at any moment. The sight of the fire, of the warmth, was an irresistible invitation, a promise of relief she could not ignore. Making a decision, with a trembling sigh, she gathered what remained of her courage. "Hello?" Her voice came out weak, hoarse, almost a whisper, barely audible over the crackling of the campfire. The two men stopped talking abruptly. The younger one jumped up, grabbing the shotgun that was leaning against a tree. The older one, with a grizzled beard and eyes that seemed to have seen many things, turned slowly, his gaze fixed in the direction from which the voice came. "Who's there?" asked the older man, his voice deep but not menacing, filled with surprise. Donna Aurora emerged from behind the tree, the campfire's light revealing her fragile, aged figure, her clothes torn and dirty, her face marked by exhaustion and recent terror. She raised her hands, an instinctive gesture of surrender and supplication. I'm lost," she managed to say, her voice choked with emotion and weariness, almost breaking. "I need help." A tense silence hung in the clearing. The younger man kept the shotgun aimed, but the older one, with a more compassionate look, gestured for him to lower the weapon. The disbelief and concern etched on their faces were evident. "An old woman," the elder murmured, genuinely surprised. "What is an old woman doing alone in the forest at this hour?" He approached cautiously, his eyes scrutinizing Donna Aurora from head to toe, assessing her condition. The young man, though his weapon was lowered, remained on guard, his eyes fixed on the strange figure that had emerged from the darkness. I was abandoned," Donna Aurora confessed, the words coming out with difficulty, laden with deep pain. "My daughter-in-law. She left me here to die." A heavy silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the crackling of the campfire. The two men exchanged glances, disbelief and concern now deepening on their faces. The older man, a man with rugged features and kind eyes, finally approached her. "Poor soul," he said, his voice softening with compassion. "Come, sit by the fire. You're trembling with cold." He helped her approach the campfire, and the warmth, as it enveloped her body, was like a balm to her frozen soul. She sat on the tree stump he indicated, feeling immediate relief, but also the pain of every muscle relaxing, of every wound throbbing. The young man, still suspicious, but with a touch of curiosity, watched her intently. "My name is João," said the older man, offering her a canteen. "This is my son, Pedro. We're hunting nearby. We've never seen anyone around these parts, much less an old woman." Donna Aurora took the canteen with trembling hands and drank the fresh water, feeling it go down her parched throat, an indescribable relief. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice still weak. "My name is Aurora." She looked at the flames, the warmth of the fire contrasting with the coldness in her heart, still marked by memories of betrayal and the brutality of the forest. She knew she had a long story to tell, a story of greed, abandonment, and an improbable guardian who had emerged from the shadows. But for now, the warmth of the fire and the presence of other human beings were all that mattered. The journey was not yet over, but the deepest darkness seemed to be behind her. She had found a safe harbor, albeit temporary, in the heart of the forest that had almost consumed her. The next chapter of her story began there, under the watchful eyes of two strangers and the promise of a new dawn, a dawn that would bring with it the chance for redemption and perhaps peace. The warmth of the campfire was a welcome embrace, but the cold of memory still clung to Donna Aurora. As she drank the fresh water from the canteen, her eyes scanned the faces of João and Pedro, seeking in them a refuge, a confirmation that the evil she had witnessed was not the only truth in the world. She knew she needed to tell her story, not just to them, but to herself, to exorcise the demons of that night. "My daughter-in-law, Clara," she began, her voice still hoarse, but gaining strength with each word. "She tied me to a tree in the middle of nowhere. She wanted my jewels, the family inheritance. She thought I would die of cold, of hunger, or be devoured by some beast." João and Pedro listened in silence, disbelief and indignation growing in their eyes. Young Pedro gripped his shotgun, an unconscious gesture of protection. "But it wasn't a beast that attacked me," Donna Aurora continued, and a faint, almost ironic smile appeared on her cracked lips. "On the contrary, a creature of the forest, a tiger. He saved me." An even deeper silence fell over the clearing. João and Pedro exchanged a perplexed glance, the story seeming too fantastical to be true. A tiger? João asked, his voice deep, but not mocking, just astonishment. Are you sure? Absolutely, Dona Aurora replied, her voice firm now. He tore the ropes with his teeth. He stayed with me all night, keeping me warm. He protected me. It was as if he were a guardian. She described the gleam in the tiger's eyes, the warmth of his body, the sense of security he had provided her. She told of Clara's flight, the promise to return, to steal the jewels that were still in her pocket. A cold, constant wait. The men listened, absorbing every detail, their initial distrust giving way to a mixture of admiration and respect for the woman's resilience. She said she would return at dawn, Dona Aurora concluded, her gaze fixed on the flames, as if she could see the future there. To make sure I was dead and take what she wanted. Dawn, with its promise of light and warmth, now seemed a premonition of danger. João and Pedro exchanged glances, the gravity of the situation hanging over them. "We can't leave her alone," Pedro said, his voice young but determined. "If that woman comes back, she could be dangerous." "She is," Dona Aurora confirmed, a chill running down her spine. "Greed has transformed her into something terrible." The three spent the rest of the night on vigil, sleep being a luxury none of them could afford. João and Pedro took turns, one keeping the shotgun ready, the other feeding the campfire, while Dona Aurora, though exhausted, felt a new strength blossom within her. The presence of these men, the solidarity they offered, was a balm to her wounded soul. With the first pale light of dawn, a distant sound broke the forest silence. It was the engine of a car, faint at first, but approaching. The hearts of the three leaped. "She's coming," Dona Aurora whispered, her voice tense. João signaled for them to hide. They positioned themselves behind dense bushes, watching the trail that led to the clearing. The sound of the engine grew louder, and soon an old jeep appeared, stopping a few meters from the campfire. Clara got out of the vehicle, her hungry, anxious eyes sweeping the clearing. She looked wilder than ever, her hair disheveled, her clothes dirty, her expression hardened by the night of waiting and the anticipation of plunder. In her hands, a shovel. She didn't expect to find anyone. "Foolish old woman," she muttered to herself, a cruel smile on her lips. She thought she'd escape. Now the jewels will be mine. She walked towards the tree where she had tied Dona Aurora, the shovel dragging on the ground, producing a metallic, sinister sound. Her eyes searched for her mother-in-law's inert body, but there was nothing except the torn ropes discarded on the ground. A pang of surprise, followed by anger, crossed her face. "Where is that old witch?" she growled, looking around. It was then that a low, guttural growl echoed through the clearing, making Clara freeze. It was a sound that seemed to come from all directions, a primal warning that made her hairs stand on end. She turned slowly, the shovel falling from her hands. Emerging from the forest shadows, with the silent majesty of a king, was the tiger. His golden eyes gleamed with fierce intensity, fixed on Clara. He was no longer the gentle guardian of the night. He was the very incarnation of wild justice. Clara let out a strangled scream of terror. She tried to run, but fear paralyzed her legs. The tiger advanced a step, then another, his muscles rippling beneath his striped hide. The air in the clearing grew heavy, charged with a primal tension. From her hiding place, Dona Aurora watched, a mixture of dread and a strange sense of predestination in her chest. João and Pedro, shocked, kept their weapons lowered, silent witnesses to a spectacle that defied reason. The tiger did not attack immediately. He circled Clara, like a predator toying with its prey, each movement calculated, each growl a warning. The terror in Clara's eyes was palpable. She stumbled backward, falling to her knees, her hands raised in a useless gesture of supplication. "No, please!" she stammered, her voice choked with panic. But the tiger knew no human pleas. He was the forest's answer to cruelty, the enforcer of a justice that went beyond the laws of men. With a powerful roar that made the earth tremble, he leapt. Clara's scream was abruptly cut short. The scene, swift and brutal, was a blur of stripes and teeth. When the tiger moved away, the silence that followed was even more terrifying than the roar. Clara lay on the ground, motionless, her fate sealed by the fury of nature. The tiger then turned his head, his eyes meeting Donna Aurora's. There was no threat in them, only a deep understanding, almost a farewell. He turned and, with the same silent elegance with which he had appeared, disappeared back into the forest's density, leaving behind only the smell of damp earth and the memory of his divine intervention. João and Pedro emerged from their hiding places, their faces pale, but with a newfound respect for the untamed force of nature. Donna Aurora, feeling the jewels in her pocket, knew the cycle had closed. Clara's greed had met its end, and she, the abandoned old woman, had been saved by an improbable guardian. The men helped her to her feet. The sun was already high, and its golden rays filtered through the treetops, illuminating the clearing. Donna Aurora's journey was not yet over, but the darkness, both of the night and of human malice, had been dispelled. She had a story to tell, a story that would defy belief, but which would be proof that even in the depths of the jungle, life finds a way, and justice sometimes wears stripes and claws. The path back to civilization would be long, but she was no longer alone. She had survived. She had won. And in her heart, she carried silent gratitude for a tiger who refused to let her die.